Welcome in to the Odds and Audibles podcast. Erik Skopil's on the show. I'm Matt Prehm. Welcome to another edition. Postseason basketball. Unfortunately for the Oregon men and women, both end in the second round. Both teams had. It's not that they lost and it's disappointing or frustrating. It's the manner in which both teams had double-digit leads. Both teams had chances late to get themselves over the hump, and they couldn't do it. And that is probably where the frustration, the disappointment, the anger, whatever you're feeling is probably coming from. And Erik, we're going to talk about both of these. Let's start with the men. 87-83 game in the second round in Seattle at Climate Pledge Arena. Old Pac-12 foes facing off against one another. Caleb Love goes absolutely bonkers for 29 points on 10 of 18 shooting, 5 of 7 on threes. He hit a couple of them late that were absolutely tremendous. Jackson Shelstead did everything he could to keep his team in the hunt. 25 points on his own, 2 assists. He made a couple big three-pointers. He had a big steal. Nate Biddle had a double-double with 16 points and 11 rebounds. And TJ Bamba went out with 17 points and played some really good defense and had the chance to tie the game late with 20 seconds left. More on that later. But it was just a little too late for Oregon, a team that was leading by 15 in the first half, jumped up on Arizona 19-4.
Yeah.
Felt very much like the Liberty game. And you were like, oh boy, Oregon is just steamrolling. They are going to mow this team down and go into the Sweet 16. And who knows? Dana Altman gets 5 days to prepare for Duke. Maybe they can formulate some plan. And then Arizona called a timeout, reset themselves. Dana Altman called it fool's gold with how Oregon was playing defensively and their offensive firepower early on. And Arizona killed the Ducks on the glass that first half. They dominated the boards. They had a bunch of extra rebounds, offensive rebounds that I think led to 2 or 3 really big three-pointers that were second chance three-pointers that were just back-breaking. Oregon goes into halftime trailing in that game 42-38, and then they played split straight up even 45-45 in the second half. We'll dive into the second half in a little bit, but just it's tough. You're up 15, and 2 years in a row now you're sitting here saying 2 more points. Just 2 more points, and you're in the Sweet 16, and you don't get there.
And maybe this is a part we're going to get to in a moment here, but I think what makes it frustrating is there are so many little kind of parts of this game where it feels like it could have gone different. Free throws, we talked about a lot. I think that's, I was watching with a group, and I think people were questioning, like, oh, is Oregon a bad free throw shooting team? Like, no, this is one of the better free throw shooting teams in the Big Ten. I think they're shooting 76%.
It's their best free throw shooting percentage as a team in 11 years at Oregon.
Yeah.
And they've historically been, under Altman, I won't say like truly the best in the country, but they've never been bad. They've never been putrid. So they've been a good number. And this is the best in 11 years at Oregon. And they picked the absolute worst time to have their lowest free throw shooting percentage as a team in 2 years.
Yeah, under 50%. I think 47 is what it finished with, something like that. I mean, just and in big spots by players who have hit those shots before. I mean, Jackson split a pair. We can get into more of this, but that's just top of mind as we kind of go through this conversation is free throw shooting. And I think, when we get into the big picture of what needs to be, looked at for next year, I think the frustrating part is free throw shooting isn't on that list probably just because, as we said, like it had been established, this was a good free throw shooting team. And the players who miss free throws are all like shooting in the 70s and 80s. So that's top of mind. You mentioned Caleb Love. My goodness, on an absolute heater.
Yeah.
I think Oregon really struggled to defend that one action too, kind of that double screen up top where they swing him around and they have, the ball screen. It seemed like a couple times they had the big kind of didn't close out and then the big tried to close out too much and that led to straight line drives. Like it just seemed like there was that action really gave them a lot of issues, which is frustrating. And Love just didn't miss. I mean, and
that's his game. Like,
yeah,
Oregon saw it in the Pac-12 championship game last year, where it was the opposite. He went like 2 of 13 from the floor. He's a volume shooter. He was ice cold, and Oregon pulled away late over Arizona and beat them. And then just like in Eugene last season when he went for a career high 36. This time in Seattle this season, he was on, and I think what's crazy and frustrating if you're an Oregon fan or playing that type of a player is he wasn't on for the first 10 or so minutes of the game.
By the way, he missed a lot of shots at the rim.
Yes. And all of a sudden he hit a 3 like inside the 10-minute mark of the first half. And it was like a light switch went on. And that's what Dan Altman talked about of this team wants to get out and run. They want you to take quick possession shots. They want to speed up the pace of the game because that's how they get into their flow. And Oregon offensively was just on fire the first 5 or 6 minutes of the game. And they kind of cooled off, but they never adjusted. They never slowed the tempo down. They tried to play to Arizona's pace. And they almost said it afterwards. That's not us. That's not how we play. And that's not how we're going to win games. They want the game played in the 70s, if not lower. This game was obviously played in the 80s, almost in the 90s in regulation. And that tempo got Love going. And all of a sudden, he saw a couple shots go down. That created the pressure for everyone else, whoever's help side defense on Caleb Love to really suck in and help him and kind of shut him down. And if you look at the stats, he had like 4 or 5 assists too. And he dished them off when it was needed. And Jaden Bradley, Delorso, and KJ Lewis, they all hit big threes. And every single one of them, I think, was all off action from Caleb Love. And he just went crazy. And sometimes you tip your hat because it's just a guy going really good. Other times it was a case of defensive mishaps by Oregon.
And then this is the part I'm curious on what you'll say, because I was watching with the group and we were curious. So I was just looking at this. So after Shellstead hits a 3 with about 4:30 to go, he takes one shot until 10 seconds to play. And it felt like he kind of deferred. I was looking through it. 7 of the 8 shots from that 4:34 to 10 seconds were from seniors. And it just seemed like Caleb Love was hitting big shots, and it felt like the best answer had been Shellstead, especially in that first half. Did it feel like they wanted to get the seniors the ball or the veterans the ball to try to get? It was interesting just how much of it seemed like Jackson was quick to give it to Bamba. Bamba initiated action. It worked sometimes. It worked. It didn't work others. Jackson just didn't look for his shot for the most kind of important sequence of the game. And I'm curious on what your takeaway from that was.
I think some of the shot selection was natural, just flow of the game. After Shellstead made that jumper, Kwame Evans had a wide open 3 in the corner. And that was that needed to go down. And not to get away from your question.
Yeah.
Kwame Evans' offseason has a lot of checklists to do. One of them is knock down the corner 3-pointer. He missed a bunch of those this season. Yeah. But that shot was created by ball movement, and I think by Jackson driving into the lane and kicking it out to an open player. So to a degree, that very next possession, like Chelsea just made a play, but probably didn't feel comfortable shooting a layup in traffic and had a wide open Kwame Evans, who's been an occasional 3-point shooter this season. I do wonder, though, if I tweeted this during the game. Arizona, with like 10 minutes to go, had 16 fouls. And as poor as Oregon was shooting it free throw wise, you needed to attack the basket to get opportunities at the free throw line. Because those are the easiest shots in basketball. You should make them. And over the course of, if you shot 7 more shots from the line to their 22 already, they probably make four of those. The averages probably start evening out a little bit. But that also sets your defense. That also slows the tempo down.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what you wanted in the game where you needed to come back. And you look at Jaden Bradley, he had 4 fouls in that game. Toby Awaka had 4 fouls in that game. Henry Visar had 4 fouls in that game. Arizona had key guys with foul trouble, and I wonder if there was a clear indicator from Altman saying, attack the hoop, get to the rim, create fouls, slow this game down, get free throws. Let's foul these guys out and make life easier for us. So, I wonder if that played a factor in Shellstead not having as many shots late. I do think a couple times they went to Biddle, who's been their most consistent player, He scored the last field goal before Shellstead did. It was a really big hook shot that would get him within, I think, 2 points, 78-80, I think it was. Bartholomew hit a transition three-pointer that Shellstead kicked it to. So I think he was involved. He had a missed shot with, I think it was
a couple minutes to go.
Yeah. So, like, he had looks. Would I have liked him to get more? Absolutely. And I don't think the last shot by Bamba when there was 32 seconds left, I don't think that was the play.
I wanted to cycle through that one. That one really stood out. It by the way, it felt incredible. Oregon even had a chance to tie it at that point, based on how everything had played out. I just didn't like the look they got at all. And you're probably right. It probably wasn't the design set.
We never asked Altman about it. We did ask TJ Bamba, and Bamba said the plan was for him to get downhill, and if the lane was open, to go at the hoop and go for the basket. But if the lane wasn't open, to kick it out to Shellstead, who was supposed to be on the wing, had a good, I think if I remember right, he had a kind of a decent look for a three-pointer, or if the three wasn't going to be open, to then shuffle back to the right side of the court where Biddle was for a pick and roll, and you just read the defense of what they give you with those two guys. That was supposed to be the play. Bamba, if you go back, he drives, it's not open, he stops, he kind of pivots, he does his thing, and then he shoots. And if you remember, Altman immediately pulled him, and he never came back in the game. And maybe this is reading too much of it, sharing information that you can't verify or whatnot. After the game is over, I'm right behind the TV broadcast, and I'm getting my stuff done really quickly to get into the locker room for post-game interviews. Andy Katz comes and walks over to talk to Jalen Rose and Robbie Hummel, the two analysts calling the game. And that's the very thing they talked about. And I could overhear their conversation. And Katz said he was right behind the Oregon bench, and he was adamant Altman did not want that shot. It was supposed to go to Shellstead or Biddle for the kick and roll if it was not open, and that's why Bamba got pulled. Is that true? I don't know. Is that sharing information? Maybe I probably shouldn't be sharing. Probably. But that's what Katz was telling the TV crew that he heard from the other side of the bench when he was behind the Oregon bench. You remember, Bamba didn't play the last 30 seconds of the game. And that was a killer sequence, and
was.
And I understand, like, I'm totally on board with the idea of, hey, we're gonna run this play, Bamba, you're gonna get the first look at it. If you have a clear path to the hoop, go to it, because that's his strength, is driving and playing through contact. But his strength has always been in fluidity. Don't sit there, jump stop, pivot, turn, look. At that moment in time, that was not the shot to take. And I think if we want to go back to another sequence that really hurt Oregon, is with 13 minutes to go in the game, Oregon forced a long miss on a three-pointer by Arizona. Shellstead got the rebound and tried to go 4-on-1 fast break and dribbled down the left side of the court, got all the way to the hoop and realized, oh, I have no path to get to a shot. So he kind of jumped in the air, spun backwards, and just kind of threw the ball back, hoping someone was there. And thankfully, Bartholomew was. But it put Bartholomew in the corner with all his momentum pulling him out of bounds. He had to call a timeout. And they were left with one timeout with 13 minutes to go in the game. And that play doesn't happen. Shellstead slows it down. Look, we could do this every single play. Like, I'm not trying to sit here and blame Shellstead here, because he was tremendous. But he pauses and looks for a good shot instead of racing down. You save that timeout, and maybe, just maybe, at that point in time when Bamba's got the ball, he's pivoting around.
He calls the time.
Call another timeout.
Right.
And reset this thing. Let's go again. So, and I think what Altman's message post-game is as terrible as the free throw shooting percentage was, and as frustrating that's going to be, and as how haunting that's going to be, his point was, we did so many other things wrong that if we just do one or two of those right, free throws don't matter. And I actually spoke with Bartholomew before Altman went and spoke with the media. maybe they shared this together. I don't know. I think it's just the team realizing it. But Bartholomew said, like, yeah, our free throw shooting was bad and it's frustrating, but we gave up 87 points. Yeah. We scored 83 and we lost. Like, we shouldn't be sitting here trying to say, oh, we needed to score even more to win. We needed to play better defense. We needed to do X, Y, and Z. We needed to rebound better because those are things we can control. And if we do those, the 12 of 22 free throw shooting doesn't matter. We win anyways. So it's frustrating. And look, it does matter because if you make half of your free throws that you missed, you win. You're in. We're not talking about Oregon season being over. We're talking about facing Cooper Flag and Duke and Newark in 3 days. But that's where we're at. So it's frustrating. I will say this. I will pivot here for a second. Biddle got a lot of flack in the first half, as he should. Mm-hmm. He had 3 turnovers that were really bad in the first half. He had 4 in the game. His shooting percentages wasn't very good. He was really struggling with Arizona's physicality in the first half. 3 or 4 shots just straight up just shut down. He couldn't back them down. But then you look in the second half, or first half, he had 5 points. He had 2 of 6 shooting. He only had 5 rebounds. He had 3 turnovers. But you look in the second half, he was really good. Mm-hmm. 5 of 7 from the floor. He had 6 for 11 points. He had 6 rebounds. He had an assist. He only had 1 turnover in the game. He only had 1 foul in the game. Oregon was better with him on the floor. He was a +1 in the second half, and he was a -4 in the first half. I just want to put that out there that yes, he didn't play good in the first, but his length defensively, his walling up, his low post action offensively in the second half was a big reason why Oregon was able to come back and have a chance to tie or win the game with 35 seconds left.
A response to 2 things, and I'll start with the Biddle thing. I was really intrigued, and again, not having seen a lot of Arizona this year, the personnel decision to take Awaka, who again had 4 fouls, and he just never came back in the game, I think, until maybe one of the last couple positions briefly as like a defensive sub, or maybe not at all. I know Vasir is like, that's an NBA player. That's a guy that the people are really high on. He's a young player. It was interesting to me that they went away from Awaka to him because Biddle kind of dominated that sequence of things with Vasir. So that was interesting to me. And while I was watching it unfold, I was going, if Arizona loses, Lloyd's going to get a ton of questions about that personnel decision. And then the other thing on the free throws, part of what made this so disheartening was not only did Oregon go 12 of 22, but that De La Rosa kid hit every single shot down the stretch. And if he just misses one, it totally changes. I'm not saying the outcome because Oregon still has to hit the 3, but it allowed Arizona to be in a spot where they said, we're not even letting them get a 3 up. We're just going to foul, go to the free throw line, make it a 4-point game, foul, go to the free throw over and over again. And I thought credit to them for hitting their free throws, but that really, I think, kind of spoke to the difference between a winning team and a losing team in a tournament setting. One goes 12 of 22, and the other has, I don't know, their 5th or 6th best player hit every single free throw in the last 20 seconds of a game like that.
It was an outcome where there was a lot of things that you were just kind of like mind-boggling. Like Brandon Angel scoring 5 points in the first.
He scored the first 5 points, I think, right? Did he have the first 5 of the game?
Wide open dunk on a great pick and roll screenings action that they had, and then they picked him out to a 3-pointer for the wing, and he splashed that. Scored 5 straight points in the first 90 seconds, and then he played 8.5, 9 more minutes the rest of the game and finished with a -13, plus minus. He really struggled with the physicality, the athleticism, and I was talking actually with Luke Jackson, who does the pregame and the radio for the Oregon broadcast, and we were talking about it, and I said, like, hey, like if you can get 15 to 16 points combined from Brandon Angel and Kwame Evans and Supreme Cook, you're going to be in a position where all of a sudden things look really good for you. And they ended up having 13. 2-point difference right there. But I think Angel was almost, it turned into a case where he wasn't playable. And that was really surprising to me. Kwame Evans on the flip side, he played 25 minutes and he had a plus minus of a positive 16. He was one of only a few players. And I don't want to tell, unless we've got more here, I'm sure, but I don't want to go too far what could be next season. But that was a clear indicator, like, it's clicked for Kwame. And I know he only had 6 points, and I know he missed a couple free throws that were really costly. He even said it himself. Like, he put a lot of blame on himself for why they weren't able to tie the game or win the game because of his free throw shooting at 2 of 5. I think one of them was a front end. But 10 rebounds in this game. He only had 2 fouls, both in the first half. He had a steal. He had 6 points. He needs to get his jumper better. That needs to take a next step. But we've talked about it for a month now. He's taken that next step, and he basically just took all of Angel's minutes. They basically flipped roles towards the end of the year. But I was really surprised at the lack of impact Angel could make. He physically was not there against Arizona that night, and it was very evident. And I think that was probably unexpected. You probably didn't think one of the best portal entries that the Big Ten took. It's not the best. It's not the top 5 best, but he was one of the most efficient players in college basketball last season, and he was almost unplayable in your last game of the year because athletically he just couldn't hang.
Yeah, athletically, and you mentioned the minutes. I think they wanted to play him more, but he got the hook in the first half, I think it was, with 2 of the worst, just awful turnovers where it's almost kind of like that should have been a Kwame Evans young guy mistake, not the veteran you brought in from the portal who supposedly has such a high IQ. And he got a hook after, I think, like 38 seconds or something like that. He had 2 offensive possessions, turned it over both times, took him out right away. Kwame came back in. And you're right, man. And maybe this is kind of a natural transition to a little bit of look ahead, unless you had a ton more left. I guess one thing I should say here is we haven't really addressed this. Awesome basketball game.
Oh, yeah.
It's not the result anyone in green and yellow would have liked. Obviously, we would prefer to have more basketball games to be talking about, and I think this team would have had a chance against Duke. I'm not going to say they would have been in the same spot as they were last night necessarily. Duke's got maybe 3 lottery picks on its team, including the number 1 overall pick. But you could have seen a scenario where that would have been a really fun, competitive Sweet 16 game. But it didn't go Oregon's way, and that's just the way it goes sometimes. Do we want to move on to? Do you have anything else here? Or did you want to move on to kind of what? Because I think there's a lot of questions about different individuals, what their plans are. We know some of those answers. We don't have others.
It's an interesting period. I've been thinking about this because I wanted to write a story about kind of where the program's at, how we view this season, where they go, and I didn't want to rush it last night because I wanted to get it up today, but I had to drive back from Seattle. As of this recording, I've been home 20 minutes. So Erik and I went right into this. But I've been really thinking about this, and I don't want to maybe blow this up too much, but I really feel like this is going to be one of, if not maybe the most important offseason for Oregon basketball outside of following the year they went to the Elite Eight and ensuring everyone came back and adding a couple pieces to give you the roster to make the Final Four, which they did. But Oregon's in a position where Nate Biddle can come back if he wants to. And look, he will be one of the best power forward, or one of the best centers in college basketball next season. He will be a preseason, I won't say All-American, but a preseason All Big Ten Player of the Year type candidate. Mm-hmm. Jackson Shelstead will be a Big Ten Player of the Year preseason candidate, probably an All-American candidate if he comes back, which he probably will. You've got Jadrian Tracy, who's already said that he's coming back. Jamari Phillips has already said that he's coming back. And maybe these things change. Maybe Oregon says we want to upgrade, and your role is going to be less, and that doesn't work for them, and they leave. But at least as of now, those 2 guys have said they're back. Kwame Evans has shown that he's taken that next step. He's got room to improve, no doubt about it. He was very I'll have these conversations. I'll make that decision when the season's over. I'm focused on my team and winning games, extending our season. He said that on Thursday in Seattle. Sunday night in Seattle, it was a totally different mentality of answer from Kwame Evans. He was asked by Bill Oram of the Oregonian, just kind of like, how does this season, the way it's ended the last 2 years, kind of drive this team with ever-changing rosters and what you do and what decisions you have to make? And Kwame Evans' answer was, I'm paraphrasing here, was like, I want to be back in this position again next year and get us over the hump. I want this team to be good. We're going to be good. Whoever comes in, whoever Coach Altman brings into the program, I know we're going to be good. He was talking very definitively as here. He's back on this team. He believes in this team. But you've got him. Mookie Cook is going to be a fascinating storyline to watch from an offseason perspective. You've got a core piece here where even if it's just Biddle, Evans, and Shellstead, you've got 2 all Big Ten Player of the Year candidates on your roster. You've got another former 5-star in Kwame Evans. If you can go out and you can collect some talent, whether it's through the portal, we also know of a couple high school international guys that are looking at Oregon. We know that they're still in with Braden Berries, a 5-star combo guard from Southern California. If you can add 1 or 2 of these pieces to your roster and you go out into the portal and add 1 or 2 more dynamic players, we'll talk about what they need later, and you can retain your core, this group, Shellstead, Evans, Tracy, they're going into year 3 together next year. Biddle will be year 2, granted, probably year 3 because he went through all off season before.
He was with them.
Yeah. So you're going to have that nucleus that's been together, that's played together, that knows kind of how each other plays. And then to just get way down the rabbit here, the NCAA tournament first and second rounds in Portland next season. Like, everything is set up where if you can ensure your roster is talented, you won't have to go far to get to the Sweet 16. You'll have 18,000 Duck fans, not 18,000, but you'll have a Rose Garden full of 7,000 Duck fans behind you, supporting you. We saw it when Oregon went to the Final Four with the women, when they had to play in the Moda Center, and how pro Oregon that was. Oregon's in a position where they could get there. They could do that. So I really think this is going to be a really critical offseason that can launch Oregon back to a trajectory where it was, hey, they're in a position to string together some Sweet 16, Elite 8, Final Fours back-to-back years, or they take a step back again. And it's much of what this season is like if they can't retain most of its roster and add a couple pieces.
I think expectations would be about as high as they've been since maybe Pritchard's last year, entering a season, the Pritchard-Duarte team that unfortunately didn't get a chance to flex its muscles in the NCAA tournament because of that stupid pandemic we all had to go through. Because I would have loved to see how far that team would have gone. Just in terms of if they do return Biddle, Shellstead, and Evans, that's about as good of a trio as Oregon has had, assuming Evans takes that step. And I guess that's an important one. It's such a crucial thing. The 3-point shooting has to be better. The consistency has to be better. He played so well around the basket defensively in that game, in terms of changing shots, and then as a rebounder. Would love to see him add some weight to that frame too. At times, he and Biddle both were pushed around a little bit by Arizona's big guys in that game. But yeah, there would be something really fitting about just how those players fit together, with Biddle and Shellstead being the primary offensive engines, and then Evans being kind of the do-everything forward, power forward that would allow them to play big, but also allow him to defend on the perimeter, which he's, I think, pretty capable of. So, yeah, you really like the build of that. And then, Matt, I think the next question is, who can become the shot maker aside from Shellstead on the perimeter? And that's probably where the portal, or maybe a big-time high school player, you mentioned one or second ago, comes into play. But they will need to find a way to find those Bartholomew Bamba shots. That perimeter shooting, that perimeter, straight line drives, which Bamba, by the way, I haven't mentioned, had one of the sickest in-game dunks I've seen from an Oregon player in a while in that first half. Just absolutely wrecked a couple of people posterizing. That feels to me like, from a portal perspective, a really pivotal part of where they might look to go. And I know we don't want to get into names because we also want to hit on some of the women's tournament here, but does that feel kind of like where your head's at in terms of where they need to go?
They need to go out and they need to find that, granted, the things that they need to find is what 95% of college basketball coaches right now are telling
right.
their assistant coaches in their staff meetings today. But Oregon needs to go and they need to find an athletic wing and probably a guy that's similar to the cut from a stylistic play, from a physical style of athlete, of an Elgin Cook, a Dwayne Benjamin, a Dylan Brooks, a guy that's 6'6", 6'7", 6'8", that you can look at and say, oh, you are an athletic freak. You can guard any position. Tonight, we need you to guard their star shooting guard, their Caleb Love. You need to just keep him in check. Tomorrow night, you need to guard this small power forward, a Trey Townsend, because they don't have an elite guard that we need you to guard. And then offensively, that guy needs to be able to be proficient in the mid-range. He needs to be proficient in dunking the basketball and through contact, and he needs to be able to hit the open three-point shot. Those are really hard to find. And if you
that's a lot of really good attributes, Matt. That's a pretty good player. That's an NBA player, probably.
Correct. But Oregon's had them, and they've had multiple of those guys on one team, and they've had guys that can go two of those three. And that's probably kind of what you're looking for, a guy that can check two of those three boxes.
Can I ask, is it any way possible Mookie Cook, because he has the athletic stuff and the defensive stuff, is the offense, is it close enough where he could be some part of this?
I'm happy you brought him up because I wanted to talk about this. I don't know what you do with Mookie Cook. Like, he was very clearly behind schedule. The injuries really derailed him from a couple years ago. Last year was basically a throwaway year. He had to redshirt because he just couldn't physically be out on the court. This season, he was behind at the start of the year. But you can see it. And as much as his brother has gone on social media, who's also his manager, and that's why I will talk about it, because he claims to be Mookie Cook's manager. As much as he has complained about Mookie Cook not playing and they give him a chance, at the beginning of the year, you saw it. You watched practice. You saw him work out in the off after games were over in the arena, and you're like, you're not ready. You're just not. And he has gotten better from the start of the season to now. I mean, he hit two really good three-pointers. Granted, it's against Liberty. It's against a defense that everyone's just kind of like, oh, just get me the ball because my tournament time's about to end and the game's over. All that's left is just clock time. But Mookie Cook hit two really impressive three-pointers. He had a steal in that Liberty game. He came in the first half against Arizona, and it was like, oh, boy, they have no one taller than 6'6" on the floor because they're trying to protect everyone's foul problems for the second half. Arizona had possession late. They went a little too early, and Mookie Cook blocked the shot. And it was an impressive play. Now, Oregon couldn't take advantage of it on the other end, but nonetheless, he made an impressive play. And then I thought it was interesting at the end of the game. Granted, you need a guy with little fouls. Mookie Cook had no fouls at the time to his name, so he was clear to foul. But he was in with 2 minutes to go, and he was playing at the most important time of the year for Oregon and trying to extend their season for another game. It's interesting. He has to get better. He has to commit to conditioning. He has to commit to eating right, to showing up and getting his rehab done correctly. I don't know if he's done all that stuff. Maybe he has. I don't know. But he has to be dialed in. He has to get better athletically, and just as much as he needs to get better skill-wise. Defensively, we can see the glimpses of it throughout the year. Top of that press, that trap. Yep. If he can be a guy that can hit the knockdown three-pointer when he's open, if he can be a guy that can swing the ball or drive and kick it without turning it over, he becomes the X factor for next season. He's 6'6". His arms are incredibly long. He's made a couple impressive three-pointers over the year. It's interesting. Personally, if I'm Oregon, it's easier to get a guy who knows the system, who's been in the system for 2 years, up to speed and better for next year than it is to bring in a new guy and have to teach him everything all over again. But what does Mookie Cook want? What does his brother manager want in terms of a role? If it's a guaranteed 25 minutes a game, you can't guarantee that. He's not ready there to say yes to that and feel confident like you're going to feel a team that's going to be better than what this version is. Is it, yeah, you're going to get 15 minutes a game, and it will depend upon your development this offseason and you're playing games. If that 15 minutes turns into 25 or more next season, then yeah. So he's the X factor or one of for Oregon next season, because he would be a lot like a Trey Townsend, what he does this season for Arizona. He would be a lot like, I hate this term, but Draymond Green, who's like 6'6", really long arms, can handle, can shoot, but more importantly, can defend a bunch of players. And it's what we're talking about with Dylan Brooks, Dwayne Benjamin, and Elgin Cook. That's
why I brought it up, because he fits 60% of that, and it's just, can he get to the rest of it? And I guess if I was Dana Altman and my pitch to him was, and you really wanted him to stay, you'd say, look what Kwame just did. We brought in Brandon Angel to compete with him for playing time. Brandon was a starter, but over the course of the year, who was playing the most important minutes when the games mattered? And just say, hey, we're going to bring in someone to compete, because you haven't proven it yet. You played, how many minutes did you play this year? 85, 100 minutes maybe? I mean, not a large number. We're not comfortable just giving you the starting spot, but we'll say, hey, we'll bring in somebody. And if it gets to a point in the year where you're the better option, we're going to honor that, just like we did with Kwame. That would be the pitch I would push.
He played 104 minutes.
Yeah. Wow. Not a lot.
Not a lot. But you're right in terms of challenge him and see what he says. And if he leaves and that's not good enough for him, then that probably tells you what you needed to know about him. And that sounds harsh. But that's the reality. And it worked for Kwame. It's worked for football. It's worked for basketball. I mean, last season with Jackson Shellstead, you know, they just didn't let him start. He had to come in and take the job. He had to win the job. So, and honestly, with him and Bartholomew, that's probably what happened. Like, Bartholomew probably was like, well, what's my role going to be? And it made Bartholomew better too. He had a career year this season playing with, 2 years now with Jackson Shellstead. So yeah, like Mookie Cook's going to be an X factor. Kwame Evans, I think he needs to be able to hit the knockdown corner three. He needs to be more physical, finishing at the rim, dunk the ball instead of trying to softly lay it up. That's the next step for him. Defensively, I'm pretty impressed there. I think that part's clicked. Rebounding part has clicked. Biddle needs to get stronger. Biddle probably needs to get heavier next season.
I think the NBA would want him to be heavier too.
Yes. And then it's just, can you go find like a backup center, a guy that can give you more than what Supreme Cook gave you? And that's not a slight to Supreme Cook. He did what he could do. He was a solid role player. But if you're gonna make a run in the tournament, you need another viable option, a guy that can do just a little bit more. Cook had like one offensive move, and he was very aggressive. He got called for offensive fouls, but he did what his job was supposed to be. You just hope that some other guys could have come up along the way. But can you find another backup center? Probably need to keep your irons warm with potential starters if Biddle doesn't come back. And then can you locate a couple guys that can play on the wing, one of which can also help run the point with Shellstead, because you got to replace Bartholomew's ball handling. That might be Jamari Phillips. He talked about it, saying like his role next year is going to be a little bit more playing point, something that he hasn't done since his junior year in high school, he said. So that's going to be an adjustment there. But this is a team that the core is there, and it should be a year. You're right. Like expectation wise, if they can keep Biddle, Evans, and Shellstead together with Tracy and whoever, regardless of whoever else they add, like if they don't, if they just go and get some 1-year portal guys that are solid rotation pieces, even then expectations will be as high as they've been since Pritchard's senior year of basketball. This team should be a top 25 team preseason next year. And if they add a couple dynamic portal pieces, it could climb to top 20, top 15. And then you get to a point where mean, maybe they hit home runs and they get two guys that are just dynamic portal guys. Top 10's not out of the question because of the core that they've got coming back.
And good players like to play with good players. If you can keep Biddle, Shelstad, Evans, the pitch becomes stronger for portal players X, Y, and Z.
100%. All right, let's pivot to the women's side. A game in which we were talking back and forth at the start of it of, wow, this team could very well, at least I was probably the more optimistic one of this team could.
Man, I've covered this team all year. I've seen the warts. I've seen that they can be up 10 and be down 10 just as quickly, and that's kind of what happened.
Because the first quarter was ugly, 12-9, defensive slugfest. But in that second quarter, Oregon started to kind of pull away a little bit, and then all of a sudden Duke made a run and got back within, 2 or 3 points at halftime. But nonetheless, Oregon had a double-digit lead just like the men did. And then just a disastrous third quarter where Duke outscored them 22-12. Oregon goes into the fourth quarter trailing. They almost come all the way back. They lose 59-53. And I think it was, to steal Dan Altman's words, fool's gold of you're walking away disappointed because it's like, gosh, they should have been in the Sweet 16. It was right there. They could have taken it. But we go back a week ago, and we're talking just win one game in the tournament, and anything else after that is gravy. And yet we got teased with a little bit of a Sweet 16 possibility, and we leave a little disappointed.
I still think it's mission accomplished.
Absolutely.
Because of the Vanderbilt win, which we breezed through the Liberty game for good reason because that's what you should have done. The Oregon-Vanderbilt game was really an all-over-the-place thing, but they got the victory. It was the first win in the NCAA Tournament in 4 seasons since 2021. And you're right. And I guess the 3 things I look at from the Duke loss are Deja Kelly, their leading scorer, who, by the way, played an awesome final quarter of the season. I have a story up on DuckTerritory kind of outlining the end of the year, what's going forward. And I pointed out that over her last 8 games, she averaged 19 points per game on about 45% shooting, which is exactly kind of what you were hoping to get, maybe even more from a star transfer portal addition. She gets her second foul with about 6 minutes to go. And Matt, this is the point where that leads, I think, is 8 or 9. It feels like it's on the cusp of maybe getting over double figures, and who knows what happens there. And then she has to sit the rest of the half. And I'll be honest with you, it was a bad call. It was the wrong call, especially, in that moment, I didn't get it. And her being on the bench kind of lets the game, kind of changes the outcome of the game a little bit in that first half. I think there was a chance for the lead to grow. Instead, it kind of stayed the same. They go up by 5 at the end of the half. And then Ashlyn Jackson kind of does the Caleb Love thing, where she just hits a crazy number of shots. And this is wild. She scored 0 points in the first half, 14 in the third, and then 20 total in the second half. And she had the first 11 points of the third quarter for either team. She goes on her own personal 11-point run, totally flips the game. They get down by 10, and then Deja Kelly makes a nice little run. But then in the fourth quarter, I think you kind of started to see some of the warts of this team and why there's tough to see them beating a team as good as Duke. And we have to acknowledge with Duke, their leading scorer didn't play in this game either. Peyton Scott didn't finish this game. We should also note. But this is still a really, really good.
That was brutal. Duke. That was, and I wonder.
Yeah, go ahead.
I wonder how much of a mental hit,
emotionally,
right, like that was to the team of seeing a guy. Kelly Graves is just absolutely loves coaching. The team absolutely loves playing with, and she goes down with an injury, and you're just, at that moment in time too, and knowing it looked like a knee injury, and she's already dealt with a knee injury. I wonder how much emotionally that was just a zapper.
Totally. Yeah. And it certainly hurt them, because my final point was outside of Kelly and a little bit of Filipina Che just right at the rim. And that's kind of what it has to be with her, unfortunately. There really wasn't a whole lot of offensive versatility down the stretch there. And that was, I think, part of the difference was that Oregon just didn't quite have enough. It was either Deja or could Philly finish. And if it wasn't one of those things, it probably was an empty possession. And that was too many empty possessions ultimately in the second half there. I thought they played really well in the fourth. They cut it to 1 twice with about 5 minutes to play, and then again with 4 minutes to play. And it felt like, oh man, maybe they're going to get, they got down 10. It's kind of similar to the men's game where Arizona makes that run, they push the lead out, and suddenly it's like, this isn't good. And just like the men, the women kind of cut right back into the lead, made it a 1-point game a couple times in the last 4 or 5 minutes. And then, of course, Jackson, playing the Caleb Love role, hits another 3 with about 1 minute and 20 seconds to go, and they're up 7. Oregon never able to really make it close enough from there. But, again, to Matt's point's the right one. Like, this is, if they had won that game, that would have been major overachieving. Duke were 14.5-point favorites in this game. They just won the ACC tournament. Oregon couldn't even win a game in the Big Ten tournament. So these were not teams that we thought were going in very competitive. I'd actually jokingly texted one of the other guys covering the team, Alec from the Register Guard, and been like, over under 15-point margin at half for Oregon. And yet Oregon was leading at half, and I was completely wrong. So I think a really good way to kind of finish a season, which was, I know from an outsider perspective, they went 20-12. It's not an incredible season. But when you go 11-21 the year before, and you lose your last 14 games, and then your 2 games in the month of March by a combined 69 points, which they did last year, which is just astounding. They lost their last game last year by basically 50 points in the Pac-12 tournament. They should turn it around where you made the second round of the NCAA tournament. I think it's a big step in the right direction. And then, as I wrote about in my story over on DuckTerritory, kind of looking forward, now it's what do you do with some momentum? This program's kind of been lacking momentum, honestly, almost since Sabrina left. I mean, I think the COVID years really hit it. The portals really hit the momentum. Kind of feels like you got some positive trajectory going in the right direction. The question is, can they actually build off of it, take that step, and improve upon that and get closer to where they think they should be year in and year out?
A couple things real quick. I wanted to just hammer home more on this was a huge step in the right direction. Not only did they win a tournament game, they won 20 games in this season. That's a number that it's like if you win 20, you have a good year. They had a winning record in the Big Ten Conference with 10-8. They were 3 games out of third place in the Big Ten standings. Like, yes, they weren't close competing with USC and UCLA, who USC won the league. UCLA was second in the league for the regular season. Granted, yes, they weren't close to that. But this is a team that was a couple games go their way, and all of a sudden they're fighting the last week of the season for a double bye in the Big Ten tournament. Like, it was a huge step, in my opinion, from afar, who doesn't cover the team in the right direction for where they were last year. My question next becomes, Erik, is like, they've taken a step. The program has got the momentum back. You've got to capitalize on it. And I saw Kelly Graves' press conference, and I read your stuff that you wrote about when the field was set, when they knew that they were in. And the narrative then was, we went to North Carolina, the state of North Carolina. We played at Duke a couple years, Sabrina's freshman year. We pulled off an upset. We pulled off another upset. We got to the Sweet 16. We pulled off another upset to get to the Elite 8. The difference with that year and the comparisons are there. I get it. I'm all on for it. Part of the hold up for me, though, is that team brought back a lot of, if not all of their core pieces and they were all basically freshmen too, except for like 1 or 2 players. Deja Kelly's gone now. Peyton Scott's gone. Can you convince Nani Falatea to come back? Probably not.
She's done. She is. She walked on senior day. My understanding is she wants to go to Kansas City and be with her husband, who's Kingsley Sumatea, the former Oregon turned BYU offensive lineman.
Filipina Che is gone. So you lose probably your 4 most productive players that finished the season. Mevius, I don't know where she fits above or below those players above her. She's your top returning scorer. From a minutes played per game perspective, she's your top, and she was 4th on the team in minutes. Sophia Bell played 20, and she was 5th. But Mevius, Bell, I can never say her name.
Etute,
Katie Fizo, Ari Long, Sarah Rambus, Amina Muhammad. That's your core, but my concern is there isn't a star like the men's side where they have a Shellstead, they have a Biddle. Like, yeah, we're losing some key pieces, but we have our best player or we have our second best player from a tournament team coming back, and that player's clearly on a trajectory to reach superstardom. Is that type of a player on this roster now, or how are they going to capitalize on this momentum when they lose 3, 4, or 5 of their best players?
Yeah, they lose their 4 leading scorers. That's never good. That's never easy to replace, Matt. No, and I think that's well put. And that's kind of what I tried to write about today, because it is different from, I think the men are just a natural example because we've already spent the show talking about it. So for the listeners, like we laid it out there. I mean, there's a chance they bring back their top 2 players and maybe their most versatile post presence, who probably is like they're legitimately their third most talented player, but wasn't like their third most productive player in Kwame.
Sure.
The women, it's really not that simple. They're going to have to find those top tier players in the portal and then develop these young players. And I think there should be optimism for those who watched this team this year about those young players. Oregon played a massive 12, 13 player rotation the whole year. And that wasn't just by happenstance. That was because they felt like they had that many good players that needed and were deserving of minutes. And, potentially 9 of those players are back, which is very exciting. And of course, player retention is part of it. Can they do that? They haven't so far under Kelly Graves, since the portal's been put into place. I was just looking at it. They lost 5 one year, 5 the next year, 4 the next year, 3 the next year. So they've had an average of about 4 players leave the program each of the last 4 seasons. That needs to change. And I think the hope is it will, as I wrote about in the story. And for those who have watched some of the press conferences from the NCAA tournament, all the players and coaches talk about how tight this unit was. And I heard that before, behind the scenes during the season. I don't think this was, hollow window dressing, to close the season. I mean, Deja Kelly said this was the most connected team she'd been a part of. So I don't expect there to be a lot of outgoing transfers. But the question does become, where do those top line players come from? And it's going to be the portal. Oregon, I'm talking to people around the program. They want to be really aggressive this year in the portal. They're shooting high. There are some players that they've passed on that are players who would have been probably among the 2 or 3 best players on this year's team. So just to put that into context, I think that they really want to go star chasing this offseason. They need to find a Deja Kelly type guard. That's, as we said earlier, when you kind of outlined that Dylan Brooks, kind of role player. Deja's obviously not the same size, but you're talking about like an elite player. They don't go into the portal very often, and when they do, it's really hard to get them. But that's the kind of player they need first and foremost, is that kind of alpha personality. And then they need a starting center, because people might like the upside of Sarah Rambis and Amina Mohammed. I think those are better either at power forward or not your starting center, to put it lightly. But that's just kind of where they're at. So can they do that? They need to probably hit 2 or 3 portal hits that are, you need some 3-point shooting. You need that elite ball handler, lead guard like a Deja, and then you need a center. I think that's kind of where they're at right now. And then you hope the development catches up. Can Katie Fiso be 80% of Deja Kelly, and then that takes a little bit of the pressure off? I think it's possible she takes a big step. I don't know if it's that big, right? It's your sophomore season. This year was kind of, you mentioned Mookie Cook's injuries. This year was kind of weird for Katie because both her father and her grandfather died unexpectedly in the middle of the season. She was away from the team for parts of it. That's a player that really needs to be the focal point of the offseason development. So you've got her, you've got Ari Long. We've run through all these names. I think there should be reasons to be optimistic about what this could be. But these next 6 weeks or 4 weeks or whatever it is for the portal are just imperative. They have to add key players, and they can't lose key players. I'm optimistic that they'll get some of this done based upon conversations I've had behind the scenes. But Matt, as you know from our own kind of behind the scenes Slack channel, there's a lot of optimism most off seasons from most coaching staffs. And some of the time it happens and works out, and it's like, okay, cool. And other times it doesn't. And then you're like, oh boy. And then you have a repeat of last season where your best players are young players who aren't ready to be alphas, and they don't play very well. You lose a ton of games. They get disenfranchised, and they leave. So you have to avoid that outcome. I think they will, but there are certainly far more questions about where the women's team will be at next year than there are the men. And while we said that, I think the men have a chance to have about as high of expectations as they've had, since Peyton's time. I think the women, unless they do hit the portal home runs, will not share those type of expectations. I mean, it's possible they go out and they land some big time players and the conversation shifts, but we'll see if that's where they're at right now. But the last thing I'll just say on that, in terms of finding another Deja, I likened it in my column today to, can you have kind of the Bo Nix effect with Dylan Gabriel? where a player looks up and goes, hey, Oregon just had a transfer quarterback come in, really improve their draft stock, break a bunch of records. Hey, that's attractive. Let me go follow that up like Dylan did. Dylan goes from being obviously a really accomplished player to being a Heisman Trophy finalist. Is there a comparable, hey, I just watched what Deja did at Oregon. That's intriguing to me, player whoever from whichever school. Let me go try to do that. If you're Kelly Graves, I think those are kind of the buttons you're trying to hit in the portal this year of, we've got a lot of things that we're excited about around the scenes here. We like some of these young players. This is what Deja just did. You can come in and be that for this team for a year or two.
And that's what I was just going to hit on is it was so critical for the future long-term success of this program to go get a player like Deja, to go get a couple other portal additions that really worked. And they not only had good years, they put up good numbers, but the team had success. And the team got to the tournament and they won a game because, as you said with the men, having good players attracts other good players to want to come to you.
Right.
And there was a bad vibe around the program this time last season. And
absolutely.
If you were a transfer portal player and you're an elite prospect and you're looking for your 1 year to get to the tournament, or you've got 2 years left and you want to play high-level ball, you took a hard second look at Oregon of, is this really what I want to walk into? Because everyone just left. They were terrible the year before. Do I really want to hitch my hook to this and be attached to this program when the negativity is what it is currently? So having the year that they did changes that. And I think I saw the video of Deja Kelly going out and speaking into the camera and talking about how fulfilling this year was and how it was her most enjoyable season of college basketball. She just got back to, she said, having fun and playing ball. That clip will be saved by Oregon basketball, and they will be sending that to every prospect. They will be having her on speed dial to give her firsthand account of what the year was like for any portal player that's got concerns or questions about coming to play for Oregon. I'm not as tied in as you are. You know way more than me on the women's side. I am casually optimistic that they're going to have a home run year in the portal because the brand power is still really strong. It doesn't matter. Oregon's O brand carries a ton of weight within the hardwood community of basketball. They're coming off a year of success. Kelly Graves still can go out and talk now about, we're a tournament team. We've gone out and we've done it before. We just did it this year. They bring back a core group of guys or girls on the team. And with revenue sharing and what we've heard that the women's team will have a piece of that pie, I'm casually optimistic that I think they're going to have a good offseason. You know way more than me. I don't know the names. I just think the way the trend is going, the conference that they're in, the opportunity for playing time that they'll be able to sell to a big time transfer, it's going to click, I think. I anticipate them having off the cuff, no information on my side. I expect them to have some success in the portal.
Yeah, I do too. And just the last thing I'll say, and I'll try not to be too, ambiguous with this, but it kind of will have to be because I don't want to share the names. Sure. But I did float a couple of players that hit the portal right after the regular season ended to some people around the program. And these were good players, like players with good stats, all conference caliber players. And I was told we might not pursue them because we're looking higher. And so I think that the hope is that they're players for the elite players. And to your point, Matt, if they can close on them, I think there's a nice nucleus here in place. But all of that will have to happen in the next couple of months here. And I'm sure we'll start seeing some portal news here not too long from now. I was actually just looking, and Oregon landed Eliza Mevius last year from the portal in about right around the end of March. So I wouldn't be surprised. Now, of course, Oregon didn't play postseason, but I wouldn't be surprised if we start hearing some names attached to Oregon, some visits scheduled here even by the end of the week. And certainly as we get into April, you're going to see this roster take form in some capacity.
And just so you know, transfer portal opened today, March 24th, and it will stay open until Tuesday, April 22nd, when players will have to put their names in. There are a couple loopholes to get into the portal beyond that. Whether you put your name on the 22nd, you still be able to get in on the 23rd or the 24th or the 2 business days after, whatever day that is. If you're a graduate transfer, you also can throw your name into the transfer portal after that time.
Right.
And if there's a coaching change, but we don't anticipate one, at least I don't. Maybe Eric, you want to break some news here at the 1 hour.
I also do not.
But if there's
by the way, that would be terrible podcasting. By the way, actually, I've heard they're going to totally change coaches, and all of this we talked about is totally unimportant. Yeah.
Yes, that is very true. That we would be fired from our jobs for daring to lead that far.
That would be bad.
So that would be another way for a player to get into the portal. So if you're wondering who Oregon loses, you have until April 23rd or 24th to really know definitively that answer. And whoever Oregon adds could happen down past that. It's just they have to be in the portal by the 22nd. So if you're Oregon, I think the big question for both teams is how many of your players can you retain from entering that portal by April 24th? And on the 25th, you can wake up and you can feel pretty confident about whoever's left is going to be on your roster next season. But nonetheless, 2 exciting seasons, 2 teams that have elevated their profiles in men's basketball and women's basketball. They're going in the right direction again. Both teams made the tournament. Both teams won a game. We've covered the season. We'll cover the offseason at DuckTerritory.com. You can read all about it and more there. But until the next time, you've been listening to the Odds and Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.